Enough said.
Hi, I'm Carl. I'm the CTO at Integrate.ai. So we build tools that allow AI machine learning work to be done on data that is sensitive and siloed. So essentially our observation is that a lot of data science and machine learning projects fail because the actual critical data to drive them is very hard to access because it's sensitive, and tends to be the more sensitive the data, the harder it is to access. And so despite a lot of efforts of things like data lakes and whatnot to make data accessible, usually the data to drive AI is very hard to access. So our tools is essentially end-to-end infrastructure to make it very easy to access the data, but in a way that's privacy protective, governance controls, but allowed to extract the insights to build models. We use technologies like federated learning and differential privacy to ensure that.
Hey guys, my name is Sully, Senior Product Manager at vidIQ, company based out of California, mostly focused on enabling YouTuber and a bit of TikToker growth. I run the AI product portfolio there, around 6 products at the moment, maybe 8 by the end of the quarter, see how things plan out. But yeah, former experiences, data scientist, a bit of technical product management, a lot of AI product management. But yeah, I guess my first exposure was kind of like Patricia at McGill, where I just got thrown into a machine learning course, and yeah, been the way since.
Great, thanks. So I want to start talking just a little bit more about the work that you do, and maybe what you can do is talk a bit about how you got into what you're doing, you know, what led you to where you are today, and not so much like education, but maybe like the insights or the business trends or something like that. So again, I'll start with you, Patricia.
Sure. So started first version of private AI 2017, and that was combining homomorphic encryption with NLP. Homomorphic encryption allows you to compute on encrypted data. And while it's very cool technology, it was very clear to me that it was very difficult to scale as a business because it's much more consulting oriented rather than SaaS based. And so I scrapped the idea, started doing more research, and then in 2019 noticed that even the very basics of privacy weren't being done properly. And that's identifying the person and identifiable information in the first place when it comes to unstructured data. And 2 years before that, I wouldn't have touched that problem with a 10-foot pole. But at that point, the models had finally been created to get to the point where you can do this, identify PII with reliable enough accuracy for it to be useful for solving the identification and replacement of PII problem. So now we deploy across the world with insurance and healthcare and conversational AI and multiple other verticals.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. So I've been with the bank for about 3 years, and to be honest, at my level, the things that I deal with is more around the organizational structure, how we actually get things to reality, operationalization of AI inside a highly regulated company. You have to go through a lot of hoops with all the good reasons to do these kind of things to bring them to life. How can we make them more efficient? How can we make them faster? How can we start integrating these technologies into our products better? Continue to educate the senior leaders and the expectations, set the expectations right? Those are all the things that I've been dealing honestly in the last 3 years within the bank. And prior to that, again, I was a trained data scientist. That's what I did at Microsoft. And I grew their teams to a national AI team leader level before I left there. And it was very much of, again, like more like a consulting kind of business that we work with our customers to build these things with them. And yeah, prior to that, there is a little bit of the startup experience. But most recently, again, the things that I'm really interested in, AI governance, it's top of my list, being in a highly regulated industry, operationalization of AI, and again, organizational structure, education awareness, and all that.
Can you actually dig into the AI governance part of it? Like what does that mean, and what should people be thinking about?
Lots of things. So, so I've been very closely working on it in the last 12 months, and it's actually, once you get into it, you realize how messy and how complicated it is, because all of a sudden you realize you have to look at the whole end-to-end life cycle even before you start taking your use case or project till the end, how it goes to the end user. We have looked and built so many tools and processes with my team. I don't know if you guys ever heard, there's this book called Checklist Manifesto that I really like. We have a checklist of everything that every data scientist needs to go through and check before they can even push the outputs to the end user. And it's, again, the whole life cycle. You need to look at the business value. Is this even the right thing to work on? Financially, non-financially, right? There's the business value, there is the impact, fairness impact assessment that we have to do, looking at risks and rewards, harms and benefits. And then once you're building it, again, you look at your data, bias mitigation, bias detection mitigation, and now your model bias detection mitigation, and the end results, who's using it, who's accountable for the end results. And again, all those checks and balances. It's been an interesting journey. I love it, to be honest, because I think anyone building AI products should be doing it, regardless of their industry. In a way, I'm kind of lucky that I am in a highly regulated industry, and it's actually not a nice thing to do, and I kind of have to do it. Yeah.
Carl, I saw you nodding a lot.
Well, I actually want to jump off something there, because like my first introduction into machine learning AI a long time ago in grad school, the course was actually called Adaptive Systems. And the idea that your software that you're building can change, and the governance problems around the fact that a key piece of software that is going to potentially make decisions, or decisions will be based on that piece of software, and that piece of software will change based on the data that is fed to it, is hard. Because things like governance and in industries where it matters to have auditing, it matters to have essentially accountability to what that software is doing. You've now introduced the hardest thing possible to marry together. So just one, that's part of the reason why I was nodding my head. But a bit, to the question around sort of the insights that drew us to where we are today. So a little bit about my background. My previous company, company called NIMI, which was a wearable biometrics authentication company, and that we had like a little bit of machine learning, which was in biometric authentication. And the thing that became obvious when we were doing that is that as soon as you have probabilistic systems, and again, adaptive systems, things that can change behavior based on the conditions, the data being fed to it, you land in some very interesting challenges around. You might statistically say this performed very well, like 80% is great or 90% is great, but you have this human engagement challenge, which is, well, what about that 10% it fails or 5% fails? Even if it's 0.1% it fails, what's the implication of that, even if it's statistically better than the alternative? And so those challenges interested me. With biometric authentication, it's like when it doesn't let you in, what are you going to do? And so when I joined Integrate, the thesis was that essentially to make much better AI, much better machine learning, the data is unlikely to be all centralized in one location. These systems are trained on data. What's the likelihood that the thing you want to build is going to be performant enough based on the one data set you have, or the collection of data that you can retrieve? And so we recognize that the future of AI is probably powered by a lot of separate data sets. And what we also saw, that's also resulting in a lot of privacy violation. And I think, what Patricia's company is based on is recognizing there's a lot of risks around privacy. And so our thread, and we've gone through a few different pivots, but ultimately it's that we need essentially ways to train models to be better based on data that's going to be spread across multiple potential sources, but also still need governance, have privacy implications around that data. And so interestingly, a lot of the use cases that we've ended up focusing on, because we realize, as a startup, you look for like those acute problems you can solve as fast as possible. A lot of it's in healthcare research, where, as you can imagine, whether it's genomics data or imaging data, that data is, you'll have one research institute that has the data they collected, another that has the data that they collected, and those are highly private, but also and highly sensitive, but also very valuable. Research is blocked by the fact that this data cannot come together. That it takes years of data sharing agreements and sort of kludgy solutions to protect this. And so we recognize, there's this collision of desire to do more with machine learning, but the data is ultimately the blocker, and so that's the insight. Initially we were building our own privacy safe data network, but now we recognize that our job is really to actually enable others to build their network. Sometimes it's just two companies or two research institutes that want to collaborate, but it would take years, and we can make it happen in weeks, where they can do that in a privacy protected way.
Great, thanks. So Sully, just, you can give a bit of backstory for you and.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for starting out, it was an AI ML course at McGill. It was an applied machine learning course. We had to hand build scikit-learn, NumPy libraries, like some of the ML course here might know. So that's kind of like first getting into it. And then really entered the data science world, where I was thrown into 100 to 150 conditional predictive models, a lot of pure predictive modeling, and that's kind of where I started to get a taste of things. And for the next year and a half or so, I eventually transitioned into sort of like an AI PM role, because we found out, if we have 100 to 200 models coming up, but we need a product manager to kind of lead them internally within the company. And kind of speaking to data governance as well, there was a very heavy learning curve for me personally as well. Because hypothetically speaking, you had 80 products, 80 models going in and out. You had conversations with privacy, with legal, back and forth. You had models being deprecated. You had new models coming in, which data points were going into each model. And all it really took was one data point that you should not be using is in those models. And is now being exposed to millions and millions of users for, let's say, hardware upgrades, for potentially sending out marketing offers for clients that are predicted to be maybe churning. So really big learning curve for me. And I think from that I kind of transitioned into my current role with the newer company, where we're touching a few different things. But yeah, from a governance perspective, it's just my 2 cents there. Really heavy learning. Yeah.
So that actually leads to the next question I was going to ask, which is, all of you kind of got into where you are through either education or previous work, or a combination of both. What advice do you have for people who are not coming from those backgrounds, but want to transition into that, or prepare? Because I think this will become something that we'll all need to understand. So, just your thoughts about that. So, Trisha.
I'd say be proactive about looking at the pain points that AI could solve, if that's what you're looking to do, become a product manager in AI.
Or can create.
Or can create.
But before becoming a product manager in AI,
But if you're looking towards that,
yes.
be proactive in looking at those problems. And be proactive in talking about it within your organization. Be proactive in first understanding, of course, what these technologies can and shouldn't do. But it's mainly about putting yourself out there and making people see you as somebody who can fulfill a position in this space. So some of the people that we promote are generally the ones that are looking towards how can we make the company better? Where are the pain points that the company is currently suffering that we can fix? And what kind of creative ideas can I come up with to help solve this problem? And how can I personally put in the effort to make that happen? And if you do that towards AI product management, there's a good chance somebody might see you and say, hey,
Okay, so just on a follow-up on that, like, that's, okay, so what you're saying is a product manager should kind of step up and kind of try to make themselves visible. And maybe go learn something, so any suggestion, what they could, where they could go learn, like, there's lots of online courses and. But are there anything specific topics that, like, should they go and take a, Coursera course on statistics or on machine learning or something else?
No,
No.
don't do that.
Good.
Don't do that, because I don't think anyone expects you to be a data scientist or understand what the model is doing, right? Like, I would say just learn the lingo. And when I say lingo, like, basically how these data scientists work or their managers, because you obviously get the product side, you will, it doesn't matter. It's just like, how do you communicate with the other side of the chain, right? And I don't have, and with the lingo, just go with the data science 101, like, whatever it is, right? Like, you just have the first understanding of it from the education perspective, and try to integrate yourself to projects or products that is happening. Obviously, don't expect to be the maybe product manager if you've never done it before, but you can be the next one or the second person, right? So I don't have too much experience with product managers, and I really hope I wouldn't offend anyone by saying this, but I work a lot with project managers. And I can tell you the best project managers that I love to work with is when I don't have to explain them what I'm doing. Like, they just know it. They ask me the right questions from the project perspective, from the whatever it is, finances, the product or business side, like whatever it is that I need to be aware of, that they bring it to my attention, and we have that kind of a working relationship. That's usually my favorite project managers. That I don't have to explain myself.
That's great. I love the fact that you just said no. That's the answer I was hoping for, actually.
I want to double up on that, because I think it's just to acknowledge it's overwhelming. Like, if you don't come from this background, I think, like, don't get down if it's overwhelming, because even if you're in the space, even if you're a data scientist, even if you're a machine learning scientist, the rate of change today is nuts. Like, so they are overwhelmed by, like, what do I look at? Like, the volume of new methods and papers is huge. So you now have lots of specialization just because it's too much altogether. I think, to add to the point, like, if you're self-educating, unless you're really interested, if you encounter a bunch of math, you probably look at the wrong thing. Like, you don't need to get into the underlying techniques. Go a level up. I think focus on the use cases. There's a lot of noise out there. Like, cut through the noise about, okay, where is this technology useful and not useful? And I think we'll talk about that today. But you can actually very quickly, I think, distinguish yourself by being very practical around, what has been proven, how does that work at a system level, not at a math level, and start to connect the dots around, the products that you manage and look for opportunities. Everything starts with an experiment. So I think having an experimental mindset, saying, hey, I think there's an opportunity here. What would an experiment look like? I think that's the role that a product manager can play.
Okay. And just a kind of an analogous question, what can product leaders do to help their teams or help their product managers or their organizations become more savvy if you're not really doing a lot of AI or machine learning work today, but you want to in the future?
I mean, I'll jump in again. I think this is maybe a generic response, but I think the role of a product leader is to be clear about the strategic direction and the opportunities they want to go after. I think it's very easy to get stuck in that we got to do something with machine learning, we got to do something with AI, but it's at the end of the day, you got to know the direction that you're going. New technologies will open up new opportunities. So I do think there is some marriage there. And so it's not, just one direction or the other, but I think doing machine learning for machine learning's sake never really produced much value.
So you mentioned something just, Carl, and I think we want to get into is, like, you talked about what you're doing in your work, but I think the flip side of the discussion is how can, and this is more of a future kind of thing, is how can machine learning or AI help us product managers, product leaders in the work that we do, right? So this is something that's certainly by the end of the decade will be much more widespread, but are you seeing any patterns? Are you seeing any trends where things like research, design, decision-making, et cetera, in our own work can be supported?
Isn't the magical one answer ChatGPT, you think?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Yeah.
No, go.
I mean, I think, again, it kind of goes to the question of what is the technology really good at, or what is it not good at? And I think the misnomer is that a lot of the new technologies like ChatGPT are about giving you answers. And I think recognizing, and maybe it's worthwhile taking a step back, like a lot of the exciting things that are in the news are around like large language models or generative AI. Really, like what's the only advance, this is a bit of a reduction, but I'll say it, the main advancement lately is just how much data these models are trained on. So you've got ChatGPT, which is trained on like pretty much all publicly available language data. You can ask it questions. It's just essentially predicting what the world of language would say as a result of the thing that you ask. So what does that mean to a product manager? I do think that there's interesting opportunities for research acceleration, like where your job as a product manager is often involves research and pulling in lots of information from different sources. I do think we're going to see more and more tools that help essentially make sense of very large volumes of data. So, I think a lot of the opportunities are around acceleration of what is very rote work. And so I think we should expect tools and should be seeking to build tools that essentially, like summarization is such a helpful, capability. Using new large language models to summarize, it is amazing. It's very helpful to accelerate essentially creating what would be a first draft of what would take a lot of effort for a human to do, but it also could be wrong. And that's the thing you have to take into consideration. So everything comes at a cost. But anyway, that's my big prediction, is that we will see more tools that help ultimately make sense of what is slow work of making sense of large volumes of data.
Anyone else want to pick up on that?
Yeah, I'll just chime in here. Yeah, so I think kind of like building on what they said, like we've been integrated with OpenAI for, I'd say, since November 2021. And so we thought at that time we were late. Last summer we thought we were late, and ChatGPT came out and everybody lost their mind. They were like, wait, this kind of been around for a while. It's really just a variant of one of their latest models. But yeah, it's exactly a really, really good autocomplete. As far as product goes, a lot of startups floating around, probably more so now, but for example, a good use case is use channel, which spits out SQL. You put in English language, gives you the SQL code. I know SQL, a lot of PMs here, I'm guessing know SQL. Suddenly now the barrier to entry into the product world is reduced by X%, right? I don't need to know SQL as much anymore. I can now use the English language. How tech teams develop. I have 12 people on my team, ML engineers to analysts to data engineers to actual data scientists, front and back end people. But do I need one person less going forward? Because now suddenly maybe 2 or 3 or 5 years from now, we have the English language where you can just type in and get to some really, really high level programming, which that can be translated into Python code. Maybe the computer science value, the degree value gets diminished maybe a little bit. I don't know. These are bigger costs, but for me, I think we will be impacted in some way. And it's technology that's definitely here to stay. More so from the product side, I think we need to start thinking from a world perspective as well, because you have OpenAI, who are leaders in the space, but you have a lot of only one big open source player right now, that's Stability. Everybody else has closed their doors, right? OpenAI doesn't let you see their stuff. The Luther, A21, none of them are actually letting you see what's happening, and they're training model maybe on an article you've written, right? And so Stability AI is going to the developing countries. They're like, hey, we're going to help uplift you. The more secularized economies, North America, Europe, is more elusive of that. So I think outside of the product world too, we need to be careful who gets their hands on these technologies, who has A100s, like, or for lack of a better word, like who has the bigger GPUs to actually train these models. Is it fair that the UK, the US, like the bigger economies can get away with this? And maybe we would have been in a world with just Dall-E and no stable diffusion. The developing countries just kind of further the gap out, if what I'm saying makes sense. But that's a bigger topic on my mind outside of the product world.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things is, we've seen sort of, with some of these AIs like biases and, the recent, what it said was that Microsoft's, crazy dialogue, it started like telling people to like divorce their wife or something like that, right? These very strange behaviors, right? And it's all statistical models, so you can't really predict what it's going to do. But, what are the sort of positive and negative impacts? And I think for a lot of us, the negative impacts we need to be thinking about as we're doing this. Carl mentioned a bit about, if something works 90% of the time, that's great, but the 10% of the time it doesn't work, what are you going to do? So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on, as we're doing our work, we're getting something, and do we know that it's correct? How believable are these things, and where should we be really thinking about how to be cautious, I guess is the way I'll use that.
That's very near to what I do every day, again, at least in the last year. It's not, I mean, yes, there's the trust into the system, and there's probably too much trust. And I'm really actually happy to see all the things that are going wrong with AI these days, because I think as practitioners, we're so aware that can happen, but I think the public was not as aware. So I'm really actually glad to see those ridiculous stories coming up. And I'm like, yeah, that's what can happen, right? So there's the trust piece, but on top of the trust piece, again, what worries me is the fairness of the situation these products can potentially create, right? So that's why before we start any project, we're doing this like harms and benefits analysis on each project. Like, what are the harms that this project can create for our client base, for our stakeholders, for our banks, for our brand, employees, anything that it touches, and what are the benefits, right? And trust me, for each project, there are potential harms. You just need to think hard about it. There's absolutely harms in each project, then you have to do the risk balancing, right? Like, okay, am I willing to take this risk? Is my benefits higher than or bigger than my harms? And if I get into this harmful situation, am I able to recover from that? And am I willing to take that risk, right? I really think we need to start putting that lens whenever we're building AI products. I don't think many companies are at that maturity, unfortunately, but I think it has to be like a key state. Like, nobody should start any AI project before doing a simple harms and benefits analysis and saying that, yeah, you know what, I'm okay with this and my company is okay with this going forward, right? Because again, you can create social injustice, you can create financial injustice, you can discriminate against people, groups, not knowingly, not consciously, not realizing doing it. So yeah.
Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes to the judgment of what the technology is good for. I think often two things get mixed up, which is there's models that are built as part of this technology, and the model can make predictions. Then there's the what do you do with that prediction? And so there's a lot of work towards automation, and so we tend to mix these two things together, which is want to have a model that's going to make a prediction and then automatically make a decision based on this prediction. That doesn't have to be, and I think as product managers, product leaders should think about more creative ways to use the technology, and because predictions can be very useful, still knowing that there might be bias and taking into account that there's bias, and that comes from the training data that's being used. It can still be useful, but you can mitigate a lot of the harms by think about use cases that are, don't try to make automatic judgments based on those predictions, but factor them in. I think there's a lot of opportunity around mixed systems that mix human judgment with machine predictions. Still risk, it doesn't remove all the risk, but I think being thoughtful towards those risks. And I think as technologists, we like the razzle dazzle, something that works like magic and looks like it's doing something in a very automated way, but that carries a lot of risk with it.
And one thing that I'm gonna add, sorry, just because I hear this question a lot, like, why are you so worried about the risks that AI can create? Like, a human can be biased, right? Like, we know humans are biased, we're all biased. And the answer to that is AI can scale way faster than humans. Like, as an example, if a human is giving 10 loans a day in a bank, if you put it through an automated system, it can actually give out 1,000 loans a day. So you might be making 10 mistakes versus 1,000 mistakes a day if there's a mistake being made. So that's what I just want to put it out there as well.
No, that's a great story. There was an article a few years ago I read about some company that built this software for policing, and it was predictive policing. And they fed in all the data from the police forces, and then they were going to predict where crimes would happen. And you can imagine how badly that turned out, because the data that the police had collected was biased because of systemic biases and other things that kind of went into the system, and then it magnified. And so certain neighborhoods, certain people, certain demographics suddenly had police arriving at their door because the software predicted there would be a crime there. And you'd think like the police would be a little more aware that there's no evidence, but the software told us. And it was, I read it and it was like one of these scenes from, what was that movie? Minority Report, right? Except at least in Minority Report, they had people, right? Here, there was no people intervening. And that was the most extreme kind of biased example I heard, but it was a disaster. And I think, to the point, like, all these systems are based on the data, and all the data has bias. And I want to talk about data a bit because it's at the root of all of this, right? Every single system that we talk about, from ChatGPT to some proprietary thing, is tied to data. And I'm just curious about, again, going back to product managers, you hear about the phrase data product managers, but what should people be aware of and be like really, really cognizant of when they're dealing with this data, and how they should understand and manipulate it and manage it? So, privacy, I'll use that one as an example. So if you want to sort of start there.
Sure, absolutely. Definitely privacy. How are you handling the personal identifiable information? What jurisdictions are you playing in? What kind of regulations do those jurisdictions have? And another really important one is also data correctness. Depending on the industry that you're in, people have the right to correct the data that you have on them. And the data correctness also very much affects the outcome of the models, whether negatively or positively for the individual. But it's law, right? So take a look at the laws around the data that you're collecting. And most importantly, if you don't need to collect personally identifiable information or information that's going to get you into trouble, don't have a specific purpose for every piece of data that you are collecting, especially if it's going to put an individual in potential harm's way if there's a data breach.
Okay, it becomes even more important when you're using cloud service providers, like where that information goes. So something again that I've had a learning curve with, a lot of back and forth. So yeah, just my 2 cents on that as well. It's be very, very careful where that information goes. Luckily, obviously, we still take it very seriously, but luckily we're in a space where YouTubers love exposure, love to kind of really come through us and talk to us and really get insights on how to better their journey. But I would say always with my previous roles, that's been a very, very big concern. Yeah.
Do we want to switch to Slido? Yeah. Okay. So hopefully people have been putting questions up on Slido. So, Adam, if you can read them out, or do you want to just go down the list?
Sure. So do you think AI has a role in the product development process? So for example, project managers can use AI to estimate how long projects will take to finish.
Absolutely. I think, like, again, it's just a prediction, but I think where data might have challenges of analyzing either due to the volume or this complexity of the analysis. Tools that help predict sort of operational aspects of development, I think absolutely should experiment with them. And I consider these pretty low hanging fruits, but they may also not work that well. You'd be open to the fact that these are all experiments.
That specific question, funny enough, when I was at Microsoft, I have heard that a lot from the customers that we have worked with. Hey, can you build me a model to see how when I can finish this project? That specific question, I actually don't think we can. And it's because of the real world data, and especially if you work in an enterprise, there are so many things coming at your way that you might not be able to plan for, and you might not even have the data for to train your model on. So that specific question, I'm not that hopeful that we're going to be able to predict that anytime
Data.
soon.
Just need more
Yes.
data.
Or more reliable data.
Yeah.
But again, I think Carl mentioned it already, that whole upfront research part is probably the most closest thing that is going to help and change with fact checking. Please check the facts, please.
As a product manager, your whole goal is to minimize bullshit and find the gold and make sure that you know how to place that based on feedback.
Yep, so I accidentally skipped one, I'll find it. Do you think product management can be automated like administration work? Will product management still be a career in 5 to 10 years?
No.
Just go home, everyone.
No, I don't. I mean, I think it's a very complex job. So I think everybody, there's not a lot of it, I think, could be automated, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's one of the few roles where you're wearing a different hat every day. I think everyone in this room is aware of that. So definitely very hard to automate. At least from other jobs perspective, I think more in danger. I think GPT-4 comes out, maybe a lawyer is in trouble. You can kind of ping questions back and forth. Obviously, you have to be careful at how much of an autocomplete it looks like versus what an actual use case is. But very confident those jobs would be the ones. Maybe someone comes out with a more of a medical screen, so GPT-4, but for medicine. But for now, it's a job which requires me to wear a different hat every day. It's pretty okay.
I'd also say it depends on how good you are at your job. If you can be replaced by AI for this, maybe you should train up a bit more.
There you go. So to the next question then, what are the top 3 recommendations for a seasoned PM starting new in AI to achieve competitive advantage in his or her career?
Depends on what kind of AI, like what kind of AI you're touching, right? Supervised, unsupervised, reinforcement learning. Are you touching APIs? Touching model links? I'm guessing would need more context there. But I guess with no context, I can take a stab. I would say at least get a basic technical know-how of how your team is structured. What data science faculties look like on your team, where they're coming in from, what your ML engineering looks like, what your ML ops looks like. If you don't know what those are, Google it or ChatGPT it, learn it, and relearn it again. And then chances are 20–30% of that will come into your role. And then you'll figure out that things you actually learn online are not what they are in reality. So that's number 1. 2 is monitoring how that's being done, maybe really focusing on that and what ML monitoring looks like, explainability. Maybe here's a 1/3 tip, either just off the top of my head, go into AI Infra Alliance, like look up what parts of the end-to-end machine learning cycle, the standard cycle, and see like what comes from there. But there's no wrong answers, I'd say, but would need more context is the right answer for that question.
I'm a big fan of, like, a lot of value is from the not so sexy stuff, and when you look at why a lot of machine learning or data science projects fail, I mentioned before about access to quality data. Well, there's a piece of that which is data hygiene. And it's just, you get broken telephone, which I'm sure seen in a lot of non-AI products where we've got bad data running through the system. That just gets worse when you try and build AI on top of it. So I think as a product manager, like finding some of those practical challenges and becoming experts in those challenges. You don't need to be an expert in everything. You can quickly distinguish yourself, get some wins.
So please lay out adoption and timeline for the AI hype cycle. How fast are we going to disruption with the GPT breakthrough? Who are potential to be disrupted?
I think we kind of answered the second part of that question already, who are going to be disrupted. Look, it's hard. I was briefing our senior executives yesterday on generative AI. Well, they asked for ChatGPT, of course, and then I was like, well, there's this whole world of generative AI. And I told them, I was like, look, if you asked me 6 months ago, are we going to be where we are today? I actually didn't think so. And I've been in space for long enough that I really didn't think this this kind of technology will be publicly available this fast. So I told them, don't ask me what I think about the next 3 years, because at this point, I don't know. I honestly don't know. We're at the point that I didn't think it was going to come this way, this fast. I don't know, you guys might have different opinions, but I honestly don't know where we're going to be in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at the classic hype cycle, it's not like this. It's sort of a lot of little bumps. And I think we're at like a local maxima right now, which is seeing the possibilities, and then the practical issues hit, and you get like a little dip, but it's still all generally trending upward, and nobody can predict. But I think it's opportunity. Like there's just so much opportunity to a lot of it's low-hanging fruit if you solve some very practical problems. I think the bigger, sexier stuff is always a little further out than everybody thinks. I mean, didn't we all think we'd have self-driving cars right by now? But no, because it's actually hard. But there's a lot of other use cases that are sort of waiting to be disrupted. They're maybe not as obvious. So, and if somebody could predict it, then they'll be rich. I don't know how many of us can do that.
There have definitely been lots of chatbot hype cycles.
Yes.
Over the years. And ultimately, for whether or not ChatGPT makes it through the hype cycle, is can we make companies get high quality data enough to train it for specific use cases?
Yeah. That was my argument going back and forth. I remember a few months ago. So for context, we have an AI coach on our web app powered by GPT. And my biggest argument was like, yeah, I've tried chatbots twice already with previous X projects, not worked out. Do I really want to do it again? It's just before the GPT hype. So just a little bit of context there. But I think to talk about the dip that you were mentioning earlier, Carl, like if you look at the Gartner hype cycle last year, I think August 2022, they placed generative AI like on a peak right now. And naturally, it's like that little disillusionment dip, and then you kind of plateau into productivity. I think I think that dip might not be as extreme, primarily because the rate of AI papers is doubling every 24 months. And that's like on a logarithmic scale, it's like straight, like a linear straight line. So because of that, it'll be a lot faster. And then B, I don't know if the open AIs of the world will stay where they are, if they stay closed source, where you have a lot of open source models coming up and upcoming, and you'll see a lot of open source players out there that can kind of maybe not be on par, but be 70-80% as good, maybe even better. So I'd say in terms of hype cycle, that's like a big trend I would foresee the next 1 year, 2 years, maybe 5, but probably quicker.
Okay, so
Do you want to wrap up?
maybe one more.
So this is related to before. How can a non-tech PM develop skills to manage an AI ML product? It's really related to the earlier question, which we kind of skirted a little bit, but maybe a favorite book that folks could use as an introduction?
So for non-technical book, there's two books by our friends just up the street at University of Toronto. So Prediction Machines, and I think the second one is called Prediction Economy. Jay Agarwal, Joshua Gans.
Prediction and power.
Oh yeah, that's sorry. Yeah, but it's they're economists who wrote it, and it's a nice non-technical perspective that sort of looks at macro trends for as a way to see opportunity and where the more sort of systemic opportunities are that could create longer term value.
And one of the best things that you could do is learn what the data should look like, what high quality data are, and how to create high quality data sets and iterate over them as language changes through time or as situations change through time. So look at casual data sets, see how they're labeled, see whether it would solve any of the problems that you're thinking of yourself, and ask people how they've gotten to the best quality data sets possible to train their models. Because without that, you're not going to go anywhere.
Another book is Ethical Machines. I am totally forgetting the author's name, but I would check that one.
And if you're interested in ML system design, Chicoya has a really, really good book. It came out like 4 months ago, Designing ML Systems, would recommend. Great author. She teaches a course at Stanford as well. So a bit more technical, but it doesn't help. It doesn't hurt to.
Great. All right, so let's wrap up. So maybe just a bit of a closing thought from each of you, just one specific thing, piece of advice or, point that you want to make to the audience. So let's start at the end, Sully.
I'd say just outside of the product world, really let's take a step back and see where the world is going. I think who has control to a lot of the generative technology today. I think I already kind of mentioned this, but who has the supercomputers, the A100s that can actually train these models. There's a reason GPT is checkpointed at 2021 July, and it did not go further. There's a big reason for that, because it takes a lot of power, for lack of a better word, to train it. And so let's try to see who gets access to this technology and whether we can make an effort to make sure it's in the right hands, per se. Because this is all that we know here. I don't know what goes on in China. I think we just recently learned how TikTok, it powers its ML algorithm, and people were losing their mind over it. So there's a lot of, so let's take a step back and make sure that we're aware of the decisions, and it isn't just necessarily purchases of the dollar value constraints, which are the easiest product bets to make, right? Okay, didn't move for that much, right? Let's take a step back. Look at us as humanity as a whole, so we don't end up in the matrix.
Okay, Sully went big. I'm going to go small. I think the one parting thought is that I think there's a lot of opportunity to cut through the noise. Like noise creates opportunity, and hype cycles, it creates motivation, incentive to experiment. But I think for people that build products, having a sort of an experimental, incremental mindset, sometimes doing the not so sexy thing, there's a lot of opportunity in it. There's useful technology. If you're not using machine learning now, it may help your product in some way, but also might not. And the experiments are the way to find out. And so thinking in small increments and how to run experiments, I think it can be a very effective way to move both your product and your career forward.
I'm going to say I agree with all, but on top of it, responsible AI design, please. If you are building an AI product, please try to think about what are the potential harms this product can create. And most likely you might not be able to think through every scenario yourself, but if your company is big enough, you're going to have a privacy person, you're going to have a legal person, you will have potentially a risk person. This is a very cross collaboration in many ways. So ask your partners, go check with your privacy partner or legal partner or whoever you have in your company. And if it's a small company, try really hard. Think about the harms that you can create.
I'm gonna go back to the data. The more that you dig into the data set, the more that you label it yourself and you try to see how you would yourself pattern match to get to the outcome that you want. The better you're going to understand what it is that you're gonna get out of a model and where the difficult aspects of the data are and where you might need to focus more time on it. Whether AI is actually the right solution for the problem. That will also help figure that out.
Great, thank you, thank you. Let's end it there. Thank you very much.
Great. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for, what is this, the end of February? There's Q&A. So we have a few events coming up through the spring, in the spring. Building products with diverse perspectives is the kind of a DEI topic, building diverse teams. Seasonal products, so think tax, education, other groups that go through like very intense contracted windows. And then financial rigor or financial acumen in product management. So unit cost economics, understanding P&Ls, income statements, and how it relates to the work that we're doing in product management. So if any of these speak to you all and you are experts, please let us know. Still recruiting speakers for these topics. So with that, let's give one more round of applause to our speakers. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us online. We are going to part with you all. Have a great night, everybody.